Hey there, sports fan. Today we're just going to talk about the books that I read in December. The first book that I finished in December was The Will of the Many by James Islington. I loved this. I thought it was great. I gave it 5 stars and I have so few notes. I see a lot of people talk about how much they liked this book, but they don't really talk about the book, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a rundown. Will of the Many follows our main character, Vis, who is an orphan teen. He lives in the Hierarchy, or Catan. Catan is split into three kind of ruling factions. There's military, religion, and governance. In this nation, when people reach adulthood, and some people much earlier than adulthood, they go to this like mysterious pillar that you perform a little ceremony at, and it seeds your will. It like sucks out your mental and physical will. So, like, your strength, but it's like more than just physical strength, literally your will to live. People who have been seeding for too long like start to kind of deteriorate mentally much earlier than you naturally would. So this pillar seeds your will, and then it sort of disperses that among people higher and higher up within the pyramid. Vis has managed to avoid going to this pillar for reasons that I won't disclose. He works at a prison, but he also participates in underground fighting for money. And at the point that we meet Vis, he's kind of just biding his time and minding his business. That is until he's approached by a man in military who is higher up, and this guy adopts him. And Vis ends up cutting a deal with his new father to go to this very prestigious and potentially dangerous academy to investigate some mysterious happenings and goings on. Vis is hiding his actual identity from everybody. He is trying to infiltrate and investigate this school. He also gets embroiled in a very messy, sloppy rebellion group that may be more or less than it seems. And all of this while trying to actually excel in the school and graduate at like the top of the class. I'm going to put this down, it's quite heavy. Linton's writing is actually a joy to read. The book is 680 pages, but it really doesn't feel that long at all. It kind of just flies right by. He writes his characters really well, and there are some characters that we're like suspicious of who maybe might have malicious intent, but we still like them. They're written so well, and it's just a joy to read. It's delightful. The action is written quite well. I don't think his action is the best that I've read. I still think that that title probably goes to John Gwynne, with Brandon Sanderson as a close second. They are just on like another plane of reality when it comes to writing action sequences. I think that Islington's is competent and it's entertaining. We have some themes of like found family. There's also some espionage, I guess you could call it that. There's intrigue, there's politics, and there's a lot of little mysteries that don't necessarily seem related at first, but as you start to learn more, the mysteries are not necessarily explained, but they're linked, and it just makes it more and more like exciting, and you just want to know what's going to happen. The story is very similar to Red Rising, so if you like Red Rising, you will definitely enjoy this. It's less of a sci-fi setting and more of kind of a, I hesitate to say fantasy, because it's not like a traditional sword and sorcery fantasy. It is fantasy because it does take place in a different world. There is magic. So it is fantasy, but not like your traditional fantasy. Vis and Darrow from Red Rising are extremely similar characters with some key differences. Like, Darrow doesn't really hesitate to kill. Death doesn't seem to like freak him out, but Vis is much more sensitive to it. Also, their backgrounds are quite different. Darrow is, all intents and purposes, like a fearless, will driven working man. Vis is not from that type of background. I won't spoil that for you. He has a background in Catan, but he has a background that nobody else knows about. This is definitely a little more sensitive, a little more hesitant to hurt people, to betray people. The burden of his secrets really weighs him down. I do have a couple of little complaints. Just because I rate a book 5 stars doesn't mean that it's like perfect and without criticism. One of my complaints is the relationship between Vis and Amisa is almost identical to the relationship between Darrow and Mustang. It kind of follows like the exact same formula. I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing, but it wasn't very original. I felt like I had read these two people already, and so it made Amisa less interesting for me. While I'm on the topic of Amisa, think I think she could have been written with a little bit more like life in her character. I love the Lycanius trilogy, and one of my favorite parts of the Lycanius trilogy is Asha. She's written wonderfully. She is a fantastic character to read. She's probably one of my favorite characters. She's written so well, and we go on like such a journey with her. I did feel like Amisa was missing some like vitality and individuality. I just didn't think that her character really comes across as an actual person. And I don't know if that is a fault of the writing or if it's just because we only see her through Vis's perspective. There's only one perspective in this book, and it's Vis, whereas in Lycanius trilogy, we get many perspectives of different characters. So maybe Asha had more life to her because we saw her perspective, but we're only seeing Amisa through Vis's perspective. It's just an observation that I made, and it was something I thought about, and I do hope that it improves. I hope we get more of her actual personality in the coming books. The only other little minor complaint that I have is that sometimes Vis is too good at everything. He does have to work a little bit, but not very much. He is just good at everything. He's already learned everything. Nothing is really much of a challenge to him. Even things that are a challenge, he seems to like inherently pick up, or maybe he's working harder than everybody else. I don't know. It does kind of track for the backstory that this character has. I wouldn't say it's as bad as Quoth from The Name of the Wind, but it is getting on the edge of like, we get it, you're the best at everything. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was great. 5 stars. I would highly recommend it to pretty much anybody who enjoys fantasy or kind of like soft science fiction like Red Rising. It was a blast. I loved it. My husband loved it. Next up in December, I read Hemlock and Silver by T. Kingfisher. I gave this book 4 stars. I thought it was a really fun romp, a really fun read. I had a couple little issues with it, but overall, I did really enjoy it. This book is about a woman in her mid 30s named Anya who is kind of a reluctant healer. She's summoned by the king of her desert home to come to his castle. He wants her to observe, diagnose, and hopefully heal his ailing daughter, Snow. Anya quickly discovers that things are not quite as simple as they seem when she stumbles upon a hidden realm inside of a magic mirror. And she discovers that Snow's illness might not be of this world. She's joined by an interesting cast of characters that includes a man at arms of very few words and a very self important talking cat. I enjoyed this a lot, but I have enjoyed all of T. Kingfisher's fairy tale inspired works. I do think that this is very misrepresented. This is not a fairy tale retelling. There are so few similarities between this book and the fairy tale Snow White. I think the only actual similarities are Snow's name, the magic mirror, and a poisoned apple. There's really nothing else tying this book to Snow White. So if you're looking for an actual retelling, this is not going to be it for you. In fact, I don't think any of T. Kingfisher's fairy tale inspired stories are actual retellings. If you haven't liked her fairy tale stories before, you probably won't like this one. If you do like her fairy tale stories, you probably will like this one. Another misrepresentation, for me at least, is that everything I've seen talking about this book, and even the jacket of this book, calls Anya a healer. I guess it's sort of a misnomer. Anya's not really a healer. She's more of like a mad scientist, nutty professor type of situation. She is almost single mindedly interested in poison specifically, And she's not necessarily interested in treating people for poisons. She's interested in discovering cures for poisons that at this time have no cure or treatment. She's very interested in fatal poisons, and she's interested in figuring out how to treat those poisons. She is not really a people person. She is not really interested in healing people. She's not mending broken legs. She actually knows almost nothing about actual medicine. While I love kind of like the healer woman trope, I felt that this was sort of a refreshing take on it, where Anya wasn't really interested in people. When somebody had some sort of ailment or an injury, she had no idea what to do. She was like, I'm not that kind of doctor. I don't know. I thought that that was like kind of a fresh take on the healer archetype. I did have a couple of complaints, one of which is that Anya is in her mid 30s. I think she's like 33, 35. And while I do appreciate having a main character who is in her 30s, I love an older main character. Somebody who is out of their 20s and like moving on with life, that's who I want to read. She doesn't really read any different from a young character. I mean, she's juxtaposed against a 13-year-old, so you do see the severe difference in maturity between like an actual child and an adult. We're in Anya's head for most of this book, and I just don't think that there was anything overtly like mature about her thinking or her speaking or her logic. It did suffer from a little bit of that miscommunication trope where if you just said the thing, then you could have avoided a whole issue. Somebody assumes something, and instead of bringing it up and talking about it, they just internalize it and then make all these other crazy assumptions. I felt like that was like a little bit immature for an adult woman. My second little complaint is that the story does kind of meander at times. It feels very slow in the beginning, which is fine. I don't mind a slowly paced book, but it feels very, very slow and like kind of wandering and meandering. And then at the end, it just like really ramps up and everything happens right away and then it ends. And it felt like a little bit anticlimactic because it had happened like so quickly. I didn't love that. I feel like maybe the end could have stood to be like 15 pages longer just to kind of draw things out a little bit and give us a little bit of like breathing room and a little bit of space to take everything in and absorb what's happening. The last book that I read in December, or the last book I read in 2025, was unfortunately One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. This book is not good. I'm very sorry if you love this book. You should probably not listen to me talk about it. If you love it, that's great. I'm happy for you. More power to you. I did not. I gave this book 1 star. I almost gave it 2 stars, but that was when I probably had like 50 pages left in this book and I thought it was going to be a 2 star book. And then by the time I finished it, I was just so frustrated and so done. It is a 1 star read for me. This book is about a young woman named Elspeth Spindle. She lives in a kingdom called Blunder that is separated from the rest of the world by a magical mist that if you walk into it without a special talisman, you go mad and presumably die. There are 2 types of magic in this world. The first type is considered good, it's highly coveted, and it is in the form of prophet cards. That is literal tarot cards that people carry around. You tap them 3 times and they can perform a very specific magical function, but typically at pretty significant cost or harm to the user. They are not tied to anyone specific. Anybody can use them, they can transfer ownership. There is a set number of them, so only however many people can have them and use them. People are very guarded, and the cards are often sold or traded for like favors or money or even marriages. The second type of magic in this world is like feared, hated, demonized, and it's so odd. This type of magic comes about if you have contracted a fever and survived. It's a very specific illness, but they just call it the fever. If you contract this fever as a child and it doesn't kill you, then you survive with some sort of magical ability. They're very, very specific. They seem to only do one thing, and they do come at cost to the user. They're almost identical to the profit cards, they're just not in a profit card. So I don't really understand why everybody fears and hates it so much. I guess it's just like the royal propaganda has convinced people to hate it. Very, very few people survive this fever because anyone who is sick with it is scooped up by the king and put to death immediately. That's how much they hate it. Our hero Elspeth is a young woman who has survived a fever, and she came away with a very weird magical ability. She has a living entity in her mind. It is called the Nightmare. He's described as a complete and total monster. When we meet Elspeth, she has had him in her head for a decade, and she doesn't know anything about him. Literally nothing. She doesn't know anything about the Nightmare. She doesn't talk to him, they don't converse. He's just there. And sometimes he will talk to her. It's always in these ridiculously infantile riddles, but it's like he talks to her without really saying anything. And she is always just like, shut up, don't say that. So it's a little bit silly and exhausting. The story really takes off when Elspeth has a chance encounter with a highwayman, and that's kind of the catalyst of the story. She becomes embroiled in a plot to do something, I guess, cure this land of the fever and the magic and return the magic to the spirit of the woods, which is where it came from. It's very convoluted. Some of my complaints: the names. The names are absolutely ridiculous. Elspeth, Spindle, Blunder. There's a bunch of tree names and they don't really make sense. The main male character, his name, and I cannot make this up, is Raven with a Y, Ravyn, U, like YEW, like the tree. Raven U. Stop. Another character whose name is Renelm Rowan, but everybody calls him Elm. So his name is Elm Rowan. Stop. But then there is also a character named Ione. I don't really know where that came from. And another who is Orit or Orit. I don't know how you're supposed to say it. It's Orithe. So Orit? The names just don't make sense. They're so odd. And it feels so like I'm 14 and this is deep kind of writing. One of my biggest complaints is Elspeth herself. She is the biggest, boringest Mary Sue. She doesn't ever actually do anything. The plot just happens to her. She just rides the wave. And then the few times that she does actually actively do something, it's not even her, it's the Nightmare. The Nightmare does things. And he does things so rarely that the price that she has to pay for him doing things doesn't really make sense. Like the investment and return rate is a little bit skewed. It does not make sense. I don't want to harp on this too long because I am actually planning to make an entire video about just this book and how I think that it relates to some bigger problems. The writing is so underdeveloped. I think that there was potential with the world and the magic being within actual physical cards. I thought that that was interesting. I've not read a magic system like that. I was interested. Century-old spirit living in your head should be a very interesting premise to a story. And it just wasn't. It wasn't interesting. Nothing about this book was interesting. And it's not because the ideas were bad, it's because the execution was very bad. The writing was extremely repetitive. phrases were repeated over and over and over again. The same descriptors were used over and over and over again. It was often very blunt and at times very juvenile and childish. It just felt like a first draft. Really, my biggest complaint is that this story had potential, but Gillig didn't have the skill to execute it in a way that was interesting or compelling. It's very disappointing to see a story that has potential kind of just fall apart around itself. All right, sports fans, that was everything I read in December. I hope that you enjoyed chit-chatting about it. And if you read these and have thoughts about them, please let me know.